Jim.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, I just want to say it's my pleasure to introduce you to Jim Mangi. After retiring from a career as a scientist and a business owner, Jim became deeply involved in dementia awareness and education. He is a volunteer community educator and conference speaker with the Alzheimer Association. He also chairs Dementia Friendly Saline, which helps people with dementia live in their community with less difficulty and with more dignity. Jim is a caregiver for his wife, who is living with younger onset Alzheimer's disease. Please join me in welcoming Jim.
Well, all right. Thank you, Sue. You've all encountered people that took a long time to say very little. I'm going to do the opposite because I've been asked to cover a lot of topics, and I'm going to do my best, but it's going to be somewhat cursory on a couple of topics, but I assure you I'll be happy to answer your questions. And I also have a rather loose relationship with the slides. So if the slides are not quite in sync with what I'm talking about, pay attention to me if you would, please, because this is we've put something together here because we want to talk about, if you'd advance a couple slides, Roger, we want to talk about this thing called Alzheimer's. And another one would be good. Thank you, Roger. And yet another one. Yeah, we have to skip a lot of slides. Go. Yeah. Another one. Because this has a quiz. You guys didn't come here to take a quiz, did you? No. All right, we're not going to do quizzes. Yeah, that's what I want. Okay. How many people living with Alzheimer's? Again, no quiz. The answer is over 6. Whoops. Did we get the wrong one there? I can't see that right. More than 6 million. More than 6 million. Run the numbers for you. More than 6 million. Actually, the number is probably closer to 7 when you count all the different forms of dementia, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. About 7 million Americans living with dementia. That is 2% of the U.S. population. For every 100 people, there are 2 people in the United States living with Alzheimer's or another dementia. The next slide, if we could. What impact does that have besides just the people? Yeah. How many people are taking care of them? Not the professionals. There's about 1 million or 2 professionals taking care of people with dementia. Well, we're talking about the family members, the people like me, the spouses, the adult children. How many of them? About 11 million or so, roughly 2 to 1. That's a huge impact. And what we wanted to do, if we can get that first video, Roger. There we go. Brace yourselves. That's a lot of money. Whoa. Not only does Alzheimer's account for more deaths than the 2 biggest cancers, breast and prostate, but the expense, the cost of Alzheimer's dwarfs the expense of any other disease. It is by far the most expensive disease. I'm not talking about COVID, because before COVID. It was absolutely the most expensive disease in the United States. Now, the next one. And another quiz. We go another one. Another one. Okay. This is a university crowd, so I think I can get away with this phrase. There has been a paradigm shift. We used to think that the thing that we now call dementia was just part of getting old, like gray hair or it's not. Go ahead. False. Yeah. It is a disease. We're going to talk about that, but I also want to make the really important point. It's a disease. It's not a disgrace. Let's go on. Another, and we're going to talk in more detail about exactly what Alzheimer's is, but here's another quiz. Yeah. It is true. In fact, I didn't know this. I wish I had this class before 15, 16 years ago when my journey began with my wife, because I didn't know. I didn't know that 1 in 20 persons with Alzheimer's is under 65. I didn't know that when my 55-year-old wife developed Alzheimer's. It is the same disease. We just think it gets started earlier. So let's now, okay. We're going to talk about Alzheimer's and dementia. We're going to hear the next slide from an expert. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, let's go ahead and hear from her.
Dementia is the umbrella term for an individual's changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning. There are many possible causes of dementia, and Alzheimer's is the most common cause. Other causes of dementia are vascular dementia, which is marked by changes in the blood flow in the blood vessels in the brain. Dementia with Lewy bodies, identified by specific brain changes throughout the brain that include a buildup of a protein known as alpha-synuclein. And frontal temporal dementia, which is marked by brain cell loss in the front sections of the brain, or the frontal lobe. Each type of dementia may have distinct characteristics to cause specific behaviors in the individual. But there is also some overlap in behaviors among the types of dementia.
Okay. Dementia. I hate the image of an umbrella, especially an umbrella with raindrops under it. I've never quite understood that. But in the world of dementia, not everything makes perfect sense. Dementia is a general term for having some memory loss, especially short-term memory loss, and some other cognitive, other thinking problems to the extent that it interferes with daily life. So we're talking about things like short-term memory loss so severe that it is problematic, which means we're not talking about where to put my phone. That just means you're alive. Happens to everybody. Okay. We're going to talk some more about that. But she said dementia, that condition can be caused by a lot of different things, actually over 100 different things. Some disorders, some nutritional or hormonal problems can cause dementia. A few. And you can't correct it by self-medicating with vitamins. But the vast majority of all the cases of dementia are caused by physical diseases of the brain, where the brain is damaged. Alzheimer's is far and away the most common of the dementia-causing diseases. We think that Alzheimer's accounts for about 70% of all the cases of dementia, which means the other 99 are relatively rare. Okay, we're going to talk now in a minute more in depth about Alzheimer's in particular, but probably the number two cause of dementia is vascular dementia, which is caused by strokes. Either massive strokes where it's obvious something terrible just happened, or a cumulative series of smaller strokes, sometimes called TIAs or mini strokes, which can cause damage over time. We do understand vascular dementia. It's a cardiovascular problem. Interference with blood flow to the brain. It's not hard to understand that damages the brain. We don't fully understand why vascular dementia and Alzheimer's seem to be linked. A lot of people, including my wife, have both Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. We don't fully understand that linkage. Other brain diseases that cause dementia. Lewy body is probably the next one. Lewy body dementia. It is similar to Alzheimer's, but it manifests a little bit differently, but in the end, it spreads throughout the brain and it ends up the same. Frontotemporal dementia is yet another brain disease, and it also manifests somewhat differently. I'm going to mention some of the differences later on. But now I want to go into, I think it's going to come up if, no, forget that one. Just go, keep going. I want to go to the pompous-looking doctor who, sorry, folks. Yeah, that one. Yeah, Alzheimer's in the next one. He's not. He's a nice guy. Keep going. Yeah, hear from the expert. Let's go ahead and hear.
100 years ago, Dr. Alzheimer described specific changes in the brain, what we now call the formation of plaques and tangles. Alzheimer's is a progressive brain disease that's marked by these key changes and impacts memory, thinking, and behavior. The brain has three main parts: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. Each one plays a role in how the body functions. Alzheimer's disease causes nerve cells to die, which leads to brain tissue loss and causes loss of function and communication between cells. These changes can cause the symptoms of Alzheimer's, such as memory loss, behavioral issues, problems with thinking, planning, and at the end stage, swallowing.
My apologies. My notes are from a different version of this, where there really was a pompous-looking doctor. So I apologize. I apologize for that. Okay, but she explained, well, what we know, we do know that Alzheimer's disease causes physical damage to the brain. We don't fully understand what's going on. We know it's real, but we don't fully understand why and what's happening. What we can see in autopsy, but now we can see during these fancy things like MRIs, we can see that there's some proteins in the brain that clump up or get all kinds of tangled up, and they shouldn't be clumped and they shouldn't be tangled. They're normal proteins, but they misshape, they coagulate. If you want to see what a coagulated protein looks like, cook an egg, and you'll know that a coagulated protein cannot be uncoagulated. All right. We don't know why these proteins, beta amyloid, tau, why they clump up in the brain of a person with Alzheimer's. But we do know that when we see this happening, the nerve cells are dying. There's some debate. Is the clumping, which spreads, is that causing the nerve cells and the connections between them to break and to die, or are both things the effect of something else? We don't know. But we do know that there are plaques, clumps, and tangles that shouldn't be there, and that the nerve cells are dying, and that whatever is causing it, it spreads. In Alzheimer's disease, that clumping process typically starts in the part of the brain that deals with short-term memory, and it spreads throughout the brain. In the other diseases that I mentioned, like Lewy body dementia, Lewy bodies are clumps of proteins that shouldn't exist, but it's a different protein than in Alzheimer's. Why it clumps up, we don't know. It tends to begin in a different part of the brain, dealing more with behavior and emotions rather than memory. So people with Lewy body dementia may have their memory perfectly fine for quite a while and have some other problems for a while. Eventually, Lewy bodies spread with the same effect as Alzheimer's. Frontotemporal dementia, another variation on the story of misbehaving proteins in the brain. Again, we don't know why. And again, it starts in a different part of the brain with different symptoms to begin with. But they all spread inexorably through the brain, such that in the late stages of any of these diseases, a person needs pretty much 24/7 help. And I used that word really intentionally, a person. I'm definitely going off script here. Sorry, Sue. A person with dementia, even a person who has lost the ability to hold a fork, the ability to walk, the ability to talk, is still a person. They're not gone. They will not be gone until their last breath. This is a really important Jim's thought. A person with Alzheimer's, a person with any of these dementias, will never stop being a person and never stop being deserving of your love and respect. All right, I'll get back on script here. We don't know the causes of virtually any of these dementia diseases. We know about vascular dementia, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But what we can talk about is we don't know the cause. We can't absolutely prevent any of them. But we can do something. We can understand the risks and maybe take some steps to reduce the risk. Let's talk about some risk factors. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, another one. All right, the greatest risk factor for Alzheimer's, and this applies mostly to Alzheimer's, less so to the others. Any guesses? The greatest risk factor? Folks, it's your date of birth. Age. Far and away, the most important risk factor. Obviously, you can't do anything about that. Okay. Roughly 1 in 10 persons over 65 have dementia. 1 in 10 over 65. Roughly 1 in 3 over 85 have Alzheimer's. Yeah, those are frightening numbers, and those numbers, the absolute numbers are going up all the time. Where are we? The greatest risk factor is age. You could skip on that. You know, like I said, I have a loose relationship to the slides. Go ahead. Yeah, and then we're going to hear the expert. Go ahead. There we go.
Alzheimer's disease is marked by specific brain changes that result in the clinical changes in individual experiences. That is, changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning. And ultimately, Alzheimer's is fatal. The exact cause for these changes is unknown, but there are some hints as to what may contribute to an individual's risk. Age is the greatest known risk factor for Alzheimer's. And when we look at populations of people, we see an increased risk over the age of 65. However, Alzheimer's is not normal aging. Family history is also a known risk factor. Research has shown that those who have a parent or a sibling with Alzheimer's are more likely to develop the disease, and that risk increases if more than one family member has Alzheimer's. When we talk about the genes involved in Alzheimer's, there are two categories that could potentially be involved: risk genes and deterministic genes. Risk genes increases an individual's risk for developing the disease, but does not guarantee that they will develop Alzheimer's. Deterministic genes, which are rare for Alzheimer's, guarantee that the person will develop the disease.
Okay, let me decode a little bit of what she said there. Family history is not quite the same thing as genetics because it is a reflection of where you were born, where you were raised with your family, how your family raised you. That may be a factor, but genetics is what everybody asks about. There is a loose link to genetics with Alzheimer's. There is one gene that is extremely rare that guarantees you will develop Alzheimer's. If you don't already know it, you don't have it. It runs in every generation of those families. We're talking about 1,000 families in the United States. Maybe there's one in this room, but I doubt it, statistically. There are a bunch of other genes, a dozen or so, that might increase the chances of developing Alzheimer's, but none of them are absolute. If you have a parent who has had Alzheimer's, you do have a somewhat increased risk of developing it. That is far short of predestining. The flip side of that is also true. If you have no history that you know of, you don't have a free ride. You still have a risk of developing Alzheimer's. My wife is an example of that. We went back 3 generations. There's no Alzheimer's in her family. Just an example. Okay. We don't fully understand the complete relationship between Alzheimer's and genetics. We're learning more and more all the time. That you're seeing that slide. We don't understand. We know this is true. Alzheimer's does affect women disproportionately, even correcting for women are longer lived than men. But even correcting for that, it affects women more. We don't fully understand why. We think maybe it has something to do with the obvious fact that women's body chemistry is different from men's throughout their lives. Maybe that has something to do with the chemistry of the brain, but we don't know that. Why it affects people of color more than Caucasians, we don't know, but that might be more a socioeconomic issue than a biological one in terms of health and nutrition. And with that, I want to, again, going way off script here, I want to talk about risk reductions. All right, there's these risks that you can't do much about. Risk reductions, I got to say, there are no preventions. There are no guaranteed preventions against Alzheimer's or the other diseases. Sorry about that. There are things that we now know that you can do to significantly reduce your risk. To the extent that you have some risk, even a parent with Alzheimer's, these 3 or 4 or 5 steps can reduce your risk significantly. Those steps, exercise. That's one thing, really important. Good nutrition, good diet. And we're talking about nothing exotic, a Mediterranean type diet, heavy on the olive oil and the fruits and vegetables, and not so much on the Big Macs and the French fries. Okay, diet. Cognitive stimulation, as in coming together to learn something. Yeah, that's good. And social stimulation, as in coming together to be with other people. Those 4 things. And in addition to that, just taking care of your heart, doing what's good for your heart in terms of diet and cholesterol, all that good stuff. If it's good for your heart, it's good for your brain. So these, because you know what? The brain gets a lot of blood from the heart. And yeah, it does, 25%. So taking care of your heart takes care of your brain. Exercise, diet, social stimulation, cognitive stimulation, those 4 things, based on a very large study, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people over many years, a very large study, can potentially reduce your risk of Alzheimer's by like 50%. Yeah, I mean, it's a big difference. Now, so I don't even know if I'm going to use any more of these, because I know I'm keeping my eye on the time. I want to talk real briefly about what's available in terms of medication, drugs. Not much, folks. There are a few drugs, forget the slides. There are a few drugs available that are, Roger is doing a great job. I'm kind of winging it here. A few drugs exist, approved by FDA, that are remedies. They're like cold remedies. You go to CVS and you go down the aisle, and there's a couple dozen different cold remedies for the sore throat and your headache, and all. Not one of them cures the common cold. The remedies that exist for Alzheimer's, Namenda, Aricept, they're approved. They relieve some of the symptoms for a while. They are good, they are worthwhile, they're not very expensive, but they don't cure or even prevent the disease. There are a couple of drugs that have just now, within the last year or two, come on the market with a great deal of controversy. Aduhelm and lecanemab. These are the first drugs that actually seem to make a difference in the disease itself. That is, preventing or slowing down the accumulation of these misbehaving proteins. The first one, aducanumab, sold as Aduhelm, doesn't work very well. It's really marginal, and it's very expensive. It's like 26 grand a year. I don't know about you, but I don't have 26 grand a year to spend on drugs. Lecanemab works a little bit better. It's a similar drug in terms of the way they think it's working. It still doesn't work very well, but we're making progress. That's the important thing. We're making progress. I think everybody in this room is old enough to remember the very first cell phones, the very first ones. Okay? They were huge. Right. They were huge. They were very expensive, and they didn't work very well. Look what we got now. Okay? I believe that many of us will see a lot of progress along the lines of the cell phone progress with drugs. We're getting better. We're not there yet, but we're getting better with drugs such that we may really be able to stop the disease. We can't yet, but I think that time is in the foreseeable future. I have tried to cover a huge amount of intellectual real estate here in a tiny amount of time. But I want to urge you, please become familiar with the Alzheimer's Association. My friend Sue over there has a huge amount of literature from the Alzheimer's. It's a great outfit. Folks, I'm a volunteer. They're not paying me to say nice things about them. I say nice things because they are a valuable resource, huge amount of good, reliable information. Bear with me one second. In addition to the Alzheimer's Association, I just want to make you aware, other reliable, evidence-based sources of information. not the random stuff you see on the internet. Talking about things like the National Institutes of Health, good fact-based stuff. They have a lot of literature here, a lot of literature that is free, and it's intended for this kind of public audience. So it's not technical literature about Alzheimer's and other dementias. You can get this stuff for free from the NIH website. So I just want to leave you with information, contact with further sources of information. And with that, I would be happy to answer any easy questions you have. If you have any, the difficult ones, Sue will answer.
What about the 2 slides you wanted to show?
Oh, you know what? I just skipped right over them. All right, I'm sorry about that, but we just didn't have time. Thank you so much for trying so hard to support me, Roger. And we just made it work as well as we could. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Well, you didn't talk a lot about the vascular dementia, and my dad had that for about 6 years, and I wonder if you could say a little bit about, a little more about vascular dementia.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that. It is probably one of our better known, better understood dementias, because sometimes we can see it happen. It does manifest as a couple different ways. Sometimes in the case of a massive stroke, it can cause paralytic problems, but it can also cause immediate intellectual problems. And it depends on where the blood clot was, in which part of the brain. So it may cause language problems, it may cause visual problems. So it's very variable in that respect. But the more subtle form of vascular dementia comes from the cumulative effect of lots and lots of little strokes that may not even ever be noticed. And that can be much more diffuse. The progress of vascular dementia, it's not a disease like the others, but if a person has had one stroke, they are likely to have another and another and another. My wife has had at least 5 that I know of, that we know of, and they're all. There isn't much we can do about that except to try to maintain good cardiovascular health. The other thing that happens with vascular dementia, unlike some of the others, is it tends to be less of a gradual decline and more of a stepwise decline, probably because there's yet another stroke has happened. So that it is common that a person will have a certain level of functionality and the next day have a noticeably, significantly different level of functionality. That is not a complete answer, but I hope that helps a little bit, my friend. Thank you.
Can you tell us something about dementia internationally? I think that your statistics address the United States.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. The data is not nearly as complete. The numbers are about 50 million people that we know of with dementia worldwide. And if you're running the numbers, well, wait a minute, that means other populations are healthier? No, it's probably just a lack of data. Right? In other words, we don't think that Americans are particularly more susceptible to dementia than folks in other countries. But we know that there's very scanty data from a lot of the relatively undeveloped world. Dementia is pretty well known and understood in the UK, Canada, Australia, and such. And I think their numbers are roughly proportional to their populations as ours is. Does that make sense? Okay. But I wish I knew more about that.
You mentioned that losing your cell phone or losing your keys is not a sign of dementia. What would you say, whether it be a parent, a spouse, or yourself, at what point do you say, whoa, this is not just me losing keys?
Thank you for that. And that's one topic that I wish I had more time to talk about. In fact, thank you for the straight line. The Alzheimer's Association has a whole curriculum of courses. We did a little bit here of understanding Alzheimer's. There's another whole course on the 10 warning signs, of which losing your keys is one of them. We can. I'm sure the Alzheimer's Association would be happy to, do some more. But to answer your question, my friend, the issue of losing things, misplacing things, or forgetting things, everybody does all of that sometimes, and it becomes a qualitative thing. Is it becoming so noticeable? I mean, everybody occasionally, where's my purse, where's my phone, or can't remember the name. Who was the star? Who were the two guys in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid? And most of us can remember that it was Paul Newman and Robert Redford at about 3 o'clock in the morning next morning. Okay. Don't call me. But when it becomes so noticeable that it's really interfering, or when the word you're trying to think of doesn't come, that can be a sign. None of these are absolute. And the overall advice on noticing short-term memory problems, misplacing things, getting confused, being unable to finish a routine task, like, oh good, thank you for that, Roger, thank you. Being unable to finish a routine task like putting the groceries away, navigation problems like driving to the grocery store that you've driven to for 20 years, having some visual problems as in getting confused about this pattern on the carpet. Any of those can be as a warning sign. None of them are positively, absolutely diagnostic. The overall advice is when a person, a family suspects that some of these things are going on, please see a doctor. Please see a doctor who will take it seriously. Please don't see a doctor who says, you're just getting old. Well, yeah, it's just like losing your hair. Go to a doctor that will take it seriously. And if the first one you go to doesn't take it seriously, please get a second opinion, because this is that paradigm shift. Even still, many doctors, even today, still will not take problems, some of these signs, seriously. We need to fix that, but you can fix it by getting a second opinion. And fortunately, we are blessed with great medical care here in the Ann Arbor area. You had a question, my friend?
Yes, my grandfather suffers from Alzheimer's, and I read a lot about it in the last couple of years, and it's been some time, but I read some stuff regarding sleep patterns and how that can affect it. He did work at a paper mill swing shift for a couple of decades, but I was wondering if you could provide any more additional information on sleep patterns in relation to this.
If I understand your question, my friend, you're concerned about sleep patterns perhaps contributing to. Okay. Yes, they might. And one of the findings that we have is that not just right now, but the lifelong pattern of getting enough sleep, and to some extent the shifting of sleep patterns, but really it's a matter of amount of sleep. We don't fully understand this, but we think that one of the functions of sleep is clearing out garbage from the brain. Proteins wear out, and there's a normal sanitation crew in the brain that comes through at night and empties the wastebasket and gets rid of the stuff before it can clump up. We're not sure about that, but we believe that sleep helps to maintain lifelong pattern of healthy brain. And the implication, what we're saying here, I'm talking about lifelong pattern. Alzheimer's is a slowly progressive disease. The average from diagnosis to death is about 8 to 10 years. And some of you recall me saying I'm in the 16th year of my journey with my wife. Hey, my wife's always been above average. But it is a slow disease. When we know about it, what we think now is that Alzheimer's disease, the clumping, the misbehaving of the proteins, whatever's going on, we think that's starting 10, 20 years before the symptoms are manifest. Yeah, that's kind of good and bad. It's frightening that it may be starting so soon, but it's good because maybe we can fix it before it becomes manifest. That may be an angle that we can approach, and that's where some of the drugs that they're looking at come in. But shy of that, getting as much sleep as you should is important. Not just late in life, but throughout your life. And there's a bunch of young professionals over there. Make them pay attention to what I'm saying. Okay, because I don't know about you guys, but I ran a business, and I didn't get as much sleep as I should have, and I regret that now. We can't fix that, but tell your kids, tell your grandkids, get enough sleep.
Yes, sir. You have been very generous talking about your personal experience. There's some evidence that the caregivers of patients with Alzheimer's have shortened telomeres, and they're at risk for their own health issues. Can you talk a little bit, if you will, about where you get your support and what the community can do to support those taking care of persons with Alzheimer's?
Thank you so much for that question. The statistics are that something like, correct me if I'm wrong, Sue, but something like 66%, 2/3 of care partners predecease the person with dementia they're taking care of. Yeah. I came fairly close. Had a little bit of a stroke or something while I was taking care of my wife. And my very supportive daughter, after the dust settled, said, "Dad, you need to take care of yourself because you're no damn good to Mom from 6 feet under." Yes, care partners need support, and we're doing. The Alzheimer's Association does a wonderful job of providing lots of different forms of support for care partners. But yes, it is a general plea for not just respect people who are living with dementia, but also to understand that the life of a care partner is extremely stressful. I know what you're talking about, a shortened telomeres, shortened life expectancy. It is very, very stressful. And please understand, if your friends, neighbors, what have you, are taking care of a person with dementia, yeah, respect the person with dementia, but also cut the person who's a care partner some slack if they are late for an appointment, if they don't get things just right. Their life is pretty tough too. Thank you for that.
I was reviewing your list of 10 things there, and you sort of touched on all of them but number 10, changes in mood, personality, and the warnings. Could you expand upon that a little bit?
Thank you for that. There's 2 causes for that. One is all the other 9 symptoms. Okay. I mean, if you are having trouble remembering things, having trouble finishing things, having trouble figuring things out, having trouble seeing space and time, having trouble remembering when things are, having trouble with just about everything in daily life, well, then of course you're going to withdraw from social life. You're not going to want to go to the club or whatever. And that may very well induce, some changes in, not really changes in personality, but changes in behavior. So to some extent, that problem is a result of the others. However, sometimes, not always, that brain disease, that progressive damage to the brain, may affect the part of the brain that deal with emotions and personality. So truly the personality becomes physically damaged from the brain disease. And the truth is probably some combination of that. And again, that differs between Alzheimer's, Lewy body, frontotemporal dementia because of the different patterns of spread. People with Lewy body, especially frontotemporal dementia, they may manifest some really bad behavioral and personality problems fairly early on. Whereas with Alzheimer's, it tends to be a lot later. Most often, the change in personality with Alzheimer's is to mellow out. Nasty people can become sweethearts. Once in a while, absolutely not the rule, once in a while, sweethearts become really nasty, even aggressive. And that's very, very sad. That's not terribly common. But that is the disease. It's the disease causing that. That's not the person intentionally becoming a really aggressive person. Okay? Thank you for that question.
Hi. What did you find most useful in your journey as you got started?
You almost know what I'm going to say since I'm talking here with an Alzheimer's Association badge. No, really, I'm teasing. The Alzheimer's Association, really. The Alzheimer's Association is it's not the only good outfit out there. It's the best in terms of comprehensive, in terms of the services, the support they offer. Let me give you an example, okay? I didn't know about the classes that they give and such. I went to a support group sponsored by the Alzheimer's Association. I'm a clueless caregiver. This is like 15 years ago. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know anything about this. I go to this support group, and there was a much older gentleman there at that time talking to the rest of the support group about his years of caregiving for his wife who was then bedridden. And he was talking about the difficulties he had. And he turned to me. He knew I was a first-timer. I think he heard my jaw drop as I listened to all this going on. And he turned to me and he said, "You'll be amazed at all that you can do and how well you can do it." And he was right. And I've always been grateful to the Alzheimer's Association for sponsoring things like that support group. It made a huge difference to me. Does that give... All right. Well, very good. Thank you so much.
This was very informative, and again, there's time. Jim will stay after if you have questions you still want to ask, so feel free. Again, help yourself to snacks and such, and we'll begin again at 2. So thank you very much. Thank you, Jim, very much.